Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our coverage of Ripple Swell. We're going to be getting into this conversation, the impact of tokenized financial assets on capital markets. We have somebody from BlackRock, Moody's, Robinhood, and CoinDesk going to be joining the conversation. Let's jump in. I will give you context when I feel it is necessary. So happy that you are with me. Let's go. So much information is coming out, guys. Make sure that you're following, you're subscribed. You got the bell notification on. I will keep you up to date with everything Ripple and XRP happening around the globe. Let's go.
Max Stein. I work on the digital assets team at BlackRock. I've been there for about 4.5 years, and we focus on tokenization, bringing crypto assets to public markets, and stablecoins.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rory Callaghy, and I lead the funds and asset management ratings team at Moody's Ratings. So we rate asset management companies that are getting into the digital asset world, as well as tokenized funds, assigning assessments to tokenized funds.
And then Nicola White, I'm the VP of Crypto Institutions at Robinhood. Focused not only on our Bitstamp product, which we acquired about 5 months ago, but also on our liquidity provision and our market making relationships globally.
So let's, get things started. Let's talk about what we're talking about. Tokenized real world assets, stock tokens. What do you guys see as this market? How are we defining it?
Great
I
question.
think it's the representation of ownership, or the reflection of ownership in the form of a token on a public blockchain. And that ownership is an ownership right in a off-chain security.
Nothing to add.
I would just say, at least from the tokenization perspective, really see the opportunity for everything to move on chain. And let's call a spade a spade. The reason that we're having this conversation is it costs a fraction of what it costs in traditional finance to run a crypto or a digital asset business because of the efficiencies that blockchain bring to the business. And so, would we have been having this conversation a year ago, given, the administration and everything?
Probably
I would
not.
argue probably not. But I think now you've got not only regulatory headwinds that are kind of moving in your direction, but you also have the cost aspect to this. And, having been in traditional finance and then also having been in crypto, you can really see the benefit and why we're going to move. And if it's not cost alone, it's all the benefits that blockchain bring to, transparency, fractionalization, and breaking down barriers, things that were once off limits to retail investors, we can now get access to 24/7 trading, globalization, instant settlement. We could probably fill the whole day with the benefits of tokenization.
We could probably fill the whole day with the benefits of tokenization. I have a family friend who's recently started to get into crypto. They wanted to go to lunch, take me to lunch, and ask me a bunch of questions. I started to go into this. They called me yesterday and said, "Hey, Rob, is there a chance that the technology doesn't get adopted? Can this be put back in the box?" And, maybe a few years ago, you could have said there's a possibility to that question. But now with the entire world competing to move to this digital and blockchain rails, she just went through some of the biggest efficiencies that institutions need to take advantage. It's not a, should we do this? Right now, it is a must because you've entered the world of competition. If some of the financial markets are doing blockchain via rails, instant settlement, being able to move everything at the speed of light for fractions of a penny, and some other countries on this old traditional system, whatever countries are on the newer technology are going to have the most growth and benefits as well as the cost savings. So now you have a global race now to compete with bringing the world and the financial markets onto blockchain rails, stocks, bonds, derivatives, real estate, debt. All of this will be here, is here, starting right now.
But I think that's really why we're having this conversation, and that's is cost is really the fundamental, and then you layer on all the other benefits. We think we could move everything on chain.
But I think where you're seeing that in terms of
We think we can move everything on chain, right? They are telling us what's about to happen. We just need to understand it, accept it, plan accordingly, and take advantage.
bridging traditional finance and digital finances, tokenized money market funds, which obviously Max can speak to. But there you have a traditional asset management product that people are very familiar with. It's a big market in itself. $7 trillion in the U.S. But now we're taking that product, trying to attract institutional capital by putting that on chain. I think in terms of the product, most of the products are operating on chain and off chain because institutional investors have some concerns around the risks of digitization. But there you've seen growth in that product. I think 2021 So around zero assets now. I think there's 8 billion or so and growing.
So as we're looking at the state of the tokenized asset market, where do you see that going right now?
So I think we've gone from about 10 years of proof of concepts and experiments where there was broad recognition about the ability to save costs, bring innovations, and unlock things that just weren't ever possible with a traditional asset. And tokenization has a ton of promise, but it has been very challenging, and there are significant roadblocks in really unleashing this sort of tokenized vision that a lot of us have today. But the reason we've made some progress from proof of concept to actual AUM, now I think around 25 billion of tokenized products on chain, is because there has been incremental improvements on the core blockers that have prevented this market from taking shape in the past. So in the past, getting access was always challenging. Traditional investors didn't have the custody to hold these things. The market sort of reshifted a little bit and said, let's focus on the people who do have access to crypto custody today, can hold, can interact with these, or let's introduce these products by abstracting away that complexity to our existing user base. And that started to build the flywheel a little bit, but the biggest kind of future impediments here are, it is a cold start. How do you get a two-sided marketplace to really start to move when you kind of don't have necessarily the right assets on chain, you don't necessarily have the buyers, and just because you can move the tokenized asset 24/7 and program it, if there's no one on the other side to buy it, it makes that use case really difficult to take off. And we're starting to see this bridged by sort of willing it into existence, whether it's bridging that on-chain liquidity to off-chain liquidity or seeding liquidity with institutional partners to get that momentum going before the markets can really take off.
So one of the biggest problems that Mr. Stein here was explaining was custody, right? There wasn't proper solutions for financial institutions to custody. So once you tokenize that asset, how do you safely hold that asset or transact or move that asset? And that is the infrastructure that has been slowly being built out by your Ripples and your Circles and your Fireblocks of the world, right? And so as we move towards this regulation and clarity and financial institutions understand what they can and can't do, they can build their products, their infrastructure around a regulated market. And that is how and when we'll start seeing a lot of this value start to move on chain.
And we're still talking about tokenized products like they're their own thing. And I think really the next step is that you're not talking about tokenized products. It's like tokenization is just status quo because of some of the benefits that we're going to see from it. And we talk about tokenized money market funds. We talk about tokenized stocks. Those are two real world use cases that we have in play today. But really, we should just at some point we should just be talking about money market funds and stocks, and then the underlying layer is tokenized, but we're not there yet. And so that's why everybody is so focused on it, and it needs to become part of our ecosystem where, we're not worried about how we get cash on a Saturday because the market's moved and banks are closed and it's creating all this stress in the world. It just naturally moves 24/7 and it becomes the status quo.
Where do you see the demand for this coming from as we look, to the next, let's say, 10 years?
It's a good question.
So I'm a strong believer that if you just focus on who's going to come 10 years from now, which is who owns traditional securities today, right? If you take away the distinction that they're tokenized, that market will come. But in the short term, we need to prove out the utility. And there's two sort of separate segments of users that I think are going to be the earliest adopters here. And we need that market momentum in order to prove the utility to actually get the larger players to eventually come in. And that's either a story about access. I can't get exposure to these products wherever I am in the world in a tokenized form. Maybe I now can, or it's utility. I can do things that I can't do, or maybe you can only do if you're a big institution. But now I can do that using DeFi and unlock utility that I never had before. So I think those are going to be sort of the earliest adopters, and then that's going to seed the market for the bigger players.
And I also think to add on to Max's point, getting people access to products that have previously been off limits, right? Like let's talk about private equity as an asset class, right? Historically, it's been off limits to investors because either the price tag is too high, you have to write a minimum $20 million ticket to get access to an asset, or the legal structure is too complicated and you have to have a team of lawyers to sift through some of these documents. Well, when you talk about tokenizing a private equity, not only can you reduce those barriers, right? So you can encapsulate it in a smart contract from a legal perspective. You can fractionalize the offering. So, I can buy $10 of a private equity. I mean, we still have some work to do on changing accredited investor in the US,
Yeah.
but I think there's been some good work and conversations that are happening in DC to that end. But that's really exciting because that's a whole set of users that previously haven't had access to these products that are now going to get unlocked, and and the demand that comes with that. And so I think that's really what we're pretty excited about is not only the globalization, which Max mentioned, but also like just breaking down some of these barriers for retail clients globally.
This is really interesting because one of the largest problems that financial institutions have right now is how do you get young investors interested in traditional markets? Recently, we have seen an overwhelming demand from younger people to be involved with blockchain and DLT rather than traditional markets. And so if this trend continues, traditional markets will be in trouble. So they're trying to find ways here to be able to connect with people that haven't engaged in traditional markets, as well as people outside maybe of the United States who are not accredited investors. How can they start, getting tokenized stocks and bonds and getting access to these markets? Because that will open up, hundreds of millions of new investors to this industry. And that's what these financial institutions are currently interested in. Let's jump back right into this conversation here.
I think that goes with, in the broader finance market, you're seeing this push, from alternative asset managers to try to attract more retail capital because institutional investors, their allocations to private markets are reaching their targets. So I think tokenization, helps facilitate, that. I think there's a long way to go before we get there. But I think also, tokenization, is going to help, level the playing field in terms of, competition for asset managers. In certain, traditional markets, firms like, BlackRock or other firms have, significant market share. But, in many of these areas, this is, sort of greenfield, right? So, there's no, sort of clear winner yet. And, I think some of these tools are going to allow, new entrants to come in and sort of define the market going forward.
Absolutely.
In terms of that institutional versus retail demand, obviously I think a lot of the play recently has been to try and make things easier for institutions to get in, ETFs, things like that. Do you see that retail side growing significantly as we move forward, just in demand terms, or is institutional going to continue to be like, I don't want to say like a key, the main player, but a key player of the growth of this market?
I think it really depends on which asset we're talking about. But given the access challenge, which is you're bringing a tokenized security to market, you need to have a whitelist typically, which investors can hold it and which ones can't, and that requires a big onboarding process. And the investors in the crypto market today aren't necessarily used to that. And you don't have the same sort of pipes that you do in traditional finance, where you can plug a product in, a brand new product, and there's embedded distribution channels that can power that product. People who are already onboarded to platforms can get access to it. We're sort of starting from scratch here on the crypto side. And so the reason it's been very institution or crypto native institution oriented, which is real, right? The top 10 tokenized treasury funds might have maybe 2,000 investors. And I would bet 90% or 80% of that AUM is concentrated among a very small handful. And the reason that is because you have these onboarding frictions that it's been easier to kind of focus on sort of large allocators than going out the long tail. And that is going to be what really makes the difference. If we can solve those challenges, whether it's through kind of plugging it right into an existing platform or other creative solutions where you can provide long tail access to these products to a wide audience without the embedded frictions that have really slowed adoption to date.
So what I'm hearing here is the current system, the traditional system, has the infrastructure that has been built out and everybody is connected. And so there's easier access for all of these people participating, right? Where you have, a billion people globally being able to participate in US markets. I'm just giving you a number here. I don't know the exact hand count, but with crypto, it's a much smaller audience because there's not as much infrastructure. There's not as much connectivity between these legacy systems and these new systems. So building that infrastructure out so you can have that access globally to all of these different investors is going to be very important. That way, when you have a new product and you bring it to market, everybody has the same access globally to that. And that's what how my understanding here. We still have some ways to go as far as developing our crypto infrastructure.
I think on the institutional side, it's about efficiency, right? So how do we use these products to become more efficient? So whether that is, I have a tokenized money market fund and I've posted it as collateral on the back of some of my positions and I'm earning interest, which today doesn't happen, right? People post cash, the cash sits there idle. Oftentimes they don't get yield on it. It takes a long time to settle. They're getting maybe part of a day instead of, you can start to get yield down to the minute, right? So in the institutional space, I think it's really about efficiency of collateral and of capital. On the retail side, I think it is about access, right? And I think it's a lot easier, and we can talk about, natively tokenized products versus, some of the derivative products that are out there today. And full disclosure, we have a stock token that sits more in the derivative space. But I think that it is about breaking down those barriers globally, right? Like our clients in Europe now have access to both equities and crypto on platform and on the same platform, and US equities that historically have been hard for them to get access to. And so I think we're solving slightly different problems on both sides, but I think what you're starting to see is, efficiency on the institutional side and globalization on the retail side.
Interesting.
But I think you need, in order to sort of benefit from a lot of the use cases that tokenization provides. I think you need more assets to get on chain, right? You need more institutional investors to buy in and start participating, because you can't really benefit from a lot of those utilities at scale unless we have sort of more participants in the market.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think we can't just be taking a traditional asset and putting it on chain and patting ourselves on the back.
Yeah.
We really need to work in consort with an ecosystem to really provide that utility and recognize what the blockchain can bring and unlock, whether it's longer operating hours, deeper liquidity, secondary trading with actual counterparties, the ability to structure it, lend against it. So when bringing these new products to market, what we need to see is not just the asset issuer working with a tokenization platform, but bringing in third-party partners so that there is a day one ecosystem of things you can do with this that are never before, have never before been possible.
And I think
Bringing in third-party partners, right? That you start to wonder, okay, right? I think it's interesting. When I listen to all of this, and I don't know what you're getting, and maybe you can let me know down below what you think of all this, but what I'm understanding here is that it's a very exciting time, and crypto is going to unlock so many efficiencies in the market. And we could talk about those for a very long time, but it still feels like we're not quite fully there yet where we're ready to have that flip of the switch moment where all of these assets move on chain. It sounds like we still need a lot of infrastructure pieces and cooperation to happen before we can really start to move the stock market or the bond market, whatever have you, on chain fully here. And so I do think that this is going to take another few years to really fully develop. Remember, once you get the Clarity Act passed here in the United States, it's going to take a few years to even get all of that rulemaking done by the SEC and the CFTC. We've done a lot of content about that, but let's get back to this. I just wanted to understand maybe where you're thinking through this conversation. Let me know down in the comments, and I just want to give you, my 2 cents. I hope you find it valuable.
the key there is to make sure that we're retaining the flexibility that crypto brings to the table, right? I've seen a lot of people that are looking to tokenize products, but then they settle once a day, or they only settle during banking hours. Like that ultimately, while it's a good stepping stone, we need to have our kind of eyes on the prize, which is 24/7 instant settlement, because that's where we're going to solve all the frictions that exist in traditional finance. And so I think we want to make sure that we have the safety and security that we're going to take from the TradFi space, but we also want the flexibility and the benefits the blockchain bring to the table. And oftentimes we see people trying to pigeonhole it in one direction or the other, and I think it's important to bring both together.
So one thing that you kind of alluded to earlier, and Nicole, I'm going to start with you here, the regulatory clarity aspect. Obviously Congress is somewhere in the process of drafting a market structure bill. What would be helpful, I'm going to just start with you, but I want to get everyone in on this, but what would be helpful from Congress that would actually make it, both safe but also easier to actually issue these products to let people access them?
Really quickly, so where we are with regulation, the Clarity Act, the House did pass a version of their bill. It is now sitting in the Senate, and Senate Democrats and Republicans haven't been able to agree on what is in that bill to get it passed through the Senate. That is what is still taking some time. Just wanted to give you that context before we have this conversation.
Yeah, I think, look, we don't have to solve, while we would love to have every problem solved today, I think realistically we need to start solving some of these more practically. And the way you can do that is often through a sandbox environment. We've seen this be really successful in Europe. Although, full disclosure, it's been so successful that we're starting to push up against some of the limits that exist in the European framework. But having a sandbox where we can start to pressure test some of these solutions, make sure that they come with the safety and soundness that you would expect for an offering like this. But right now, we launched in Europe, our stock tokens offering in Europe, because we had that regulatory clarity. We would have loved to do the same thing in the US, but we need that regulatory clarity. And I mean, clarity is bad because we're the act and the word, but we'll get over that. But excited that people are talking about it in DC. Would love to see it actually come to fruition.
Yep.
And if it's not going to come in the form of the Clarity Act, we would love to see it through a sandbox environment where we get to start testing some of these use cases and offering them out to clients in the US.
What I'd add, just more, this is a global thing, it's not just the US, I think more standardization is going to provide, I think more confidence for investors and sponsors. I mean, in Europe, you could have, a fund manager in one domicile, the fund, registered another domicile, and then the custodian. So you're dealing with a lot of different, potential, regulations, per country. And I think if there's more creation of standardization, I think that's going to help the industry.
It's been interesting to see, given the global nature of what's happening, there's a lot of experimentation happening offshore, and they're trying very different strategies. And I think we're going to be able to have our regulators in the US look at these various implementations and opportunities and provide their own views. So hopefully, I think we'll see some guidance on some of the experiments that aren't necessarily happening today in a sandbox or in the US, but offshore, and then we'll be able to learn from those.
You are seeing the SEC and Paul Atkins starting to build a similar sandbox so you can have some of this testing and collaboration starting to happen here in the United States. You do look globally, the EU, other countries like Japan, they are moving forward with, the regulation that they passed a long time ago. And the US needs to be able to create legislation that allows value to flow seamlessly, at least through our partner countries, right? Because if the US has a more stronger regulation than the UK and value cannot transfer between the two countries, we really haven't solved anything. And we're going to have all of these siloed systems. So having the conversations with regulators and jurisdictions around the world is going to be very important in the days to come. So we can all be on a level playing field with regulations and rulemaking. That way this crypto can really seamlessly grow over time here.
Rory, you brought up this really interesting point about standardization, which, kind of one of the things that gets me about crypto is this, conceptually, crypto is the same around the world. If I'm in India and I'm buying a token, it's the same process. Stock tokens are kind of, by definition, a bit more, not stock tokens, but stocks, securities are more restricted. You have, the different jurisdictional, regimes. Is there any kind of, inherent contradiction in trying to tokenize these stocks and securities, or is it all going to just lower barrier to access regardless of who and where people are?
That's your world.
I can take that one. I mean, I think from our perspective, it definitely lowers the barriers to entry. We want to do it in a way where we're being thoughtful about investor protection, but ultimately we'd love to see native tokenization. But until we get that native tokenization, I think you're going to see tokenization in the form of derivatives and exposure to assets in different jurisdictions is probably the evolution we're going to see. We saw Galaxy do native tokenization earlier this year. We'd love to see more of that, but issuers are not there yet, right? We'd love Galaxy is probably the best example of someone that's at the forefront because of not only their background in the crypto space and the technology that they're able to kind of put around that, but like a pharmaceutical company to start natively tokenizing their stock, that's going to be hard for them. So we're going to need to help them with the infrastructure, and that infrastructure right now looks like derivatives exposure. And hopefully, over the next couple of years, we can start to bridge some of those tokens over to native tokenization, whether that's through burning the existing derivatives and then natively tokenizing them. But I think we want to have those conversations, and we want to move that forward, and we're going to do it by kind of pushing boundaries in that space.
It sounds like they need to understand the rulemaking here. How is this going to work? What is the process going to be when you have, let's say, a new company issuing stock, right? Is that stock going to now be issued on chain only, right? And what happens if there's already existing stock? Do you delete is the wrong word here? Do you burn the stuff in the legacy systems, the shares, the stocks, whatever it is, and then when you move that value on chain, is that like we have to set up the laws and the rules around the ownership of that and when that is bought and sold. And so there is a lot of complexity here that still needs to be figured out. I'm hearing that this still is going to take some time here. I know there's some people that predict that all of this is going to happen in like the next 2 months. I just don't see that, but I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, I do see it sort of as like stepping stones, right? Like first phase, it's really, we just need to bring these products on chain, and we're not going to do too much to the underlying. So it's like the derivatives, it's the feeders, it's the wrapped type products, and then it's, just the native tokenization. But I don't fully align with the phrasing native tokenization because it really is just a representation of something that originated off chain. And then I think that third phase is really building almost from the ground up, token first approach, where given the unique advantages and things you can do with tokens and smart contracts, securities that start not on traditional rails first, but start in tokenized form is probably where things will eventually go and have very different features and won't necessarily have to conform to what the underlying or traditional security is restricted by.
So
That's
for
interesting.
any investors in the audience or watching, I don't know if this is being streamed online, but if there is, we're seeing, I would say, a couple of warning signs in the broader economy. How will these affect the tokenized real-world asset market, if at all? And just kind of how are you looking at that, as we look into the next year or so?
Yikes.
Look, I think, if you think we're in an easing cycle and we're starting to see interest rates, the adjustment of interest rates, then what people are going to do is they're going to look for yield enhancement and risk appetite in other products, right? So I think it can only be helpful for some of these tokenized products. So I would say from a risk appetite perspective, probably net positive through next year if we continue to see this easing cycle go on. And then we just need to make sure that we're being really responsible with how we're offering these products. I think, the last thing we want to do is create another credit crisis or, offer something that isn't suitable to retail clients. And that's really where I think the focus needs to be for next year, right? As people start to pile into the space and start to look different ways to invest, we just need to be really, really thoughtful about the products that we're offering and making sure that we're being respectful of the risk profile of a retail investor.
But I would just add, tokenization itself, at least, in my opinion, doesn't mitigate any of the underlying, credit or market risk of the assets, say in a tokenized, fund. The tokenized money market fund is exposed to the same, sort of credit risk depending on the underlying assets or market risks, depending on what's going on in the broader, economy. So I think the technology itself, makes other things, more efficient, makes it, cheaper potentially, and provides some benefits around, collateral mobility. But in terms of, the underlying risks of the assets that are backing that, I mean, they're going to be exposed just like any other, instrument or any other, fund vehicle.
I agree. I think at the end state, it shouldn't really make too much of a difference. But during the sort of adoption arc, we do want people coming in with confidence and increasing their experimentation and their innovation, and things like that tend to be pulled in slightly and tightened during periods of economic uncertainty. So that may slow things down slightly.
Gotcha. So we have just under a minute and a half left. Let's just do closing thoughts. I'm going to start with you and just work our way this way. As we leave, what should people take away?
I think, if you're in this space, either as an institutional investor, as a retail investor, at least educate yourself about what's going on in the space.
Absolutely.
Be really thoughtful. We do really think that this is going to revolutionize the way finance works over the next 5-10 years. And so I think it's no longer an option for people to be like, this is a fun thing that sits on the side. This is going to be in every workflow that you participate in, in the financial ecosystem.
Love that.
And I think, tokenization, just speaking on the asset management industry, I think it really has the potential to modernize it. You had the mutual fund, and then the biggest technology innovation in the mutual fund or in the asset management industry has been the ETF. I think, tokenization is going to, really, sort of take the asset management industry to the next level in terms of ability to customize, products, ability to, make things more efficient for the end investor. So I think it's going to be a fun area to watch.
The ultimate vision of every investor in the world holding whatever assets they want exposure to in their wallet, automated, earning yield, powering DeFi. It's a very exciting vision that is very democratizing and very noble, I think. we have a lot of steps to get there, and we just need to continue to focus on how do we solve the core challenges. And there's a huge business opportunity to get in to some of these niche challenges, whether it's liquidity, whether it's access, whether it's bringing more utility to these products. That is really essential for us to take these, because we have all these asset issuers. They want to bring their funds on chain, but we need to bring and solve those challenges first.
Awesome. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have, but I want to thank Mac, Rory, and Nicola for this panel, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. And let's see how the rest of the day goes.
Guys, thank you so much for being here. If you made it to the end, please let me know, what do you think about all of this? It does help me get a better understanding of tokenization and how far we still are for making this an everyday experience through markets globally. And I do think we are taking incredible steps forward, but there still is a lot to do. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one. I will continue to cover all of Ripple Swell and bring you the latest and breaking news, as well as my opinion on all of this. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.